Hello, everyone. I'm Sofia Cruz. Welcome back to the Minute Markets podcast by the GW Stock and Portfolio Management Club. This week, we're going to be talking about some of the biggest financial trends with some of the insights from the sharpest minds in the industry. I'm really excited to be hosting this episode alongside with someone who's really important in the business school. She's someone a lot of us look up to, and we get inspired by her. Her name's Jenna Ross. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Sophia. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you here. So you've had tons of expertise in these finance fields.
I hope so. I hope that people can get something out of this because I remember when I was younger in the business school, I found it quite challenging to navigate where to get financial information from. So I'm so glad you all started this podcast. It seems like a great resource.
We're trying our best here. Yeah, but I mean, you've done tons of work in your professional life. Your career's starting super strong. And we'd like to know more about you. I don't want to be telling your entire story.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to introduce us to your story and what has gotten you until where you are.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the introduction. Y'all are very kind. So my path into finance started earlier in high school. I had done very well in the AP Economics exam. And so I had started by competing at the Federal Reserve in New York City, predicting interest rates and kind of composing a balance sheet for the Fed. And then my senior year, when we went remote because of COVID, I got assigned to write about the inequality in agriculture and financial downturn in agriculture. And, we were just talking about this. I'm from northern New Jersey, outside of New York City. And I remember, when I got assigned that topic, I was like, what? I don't know anything about agriculture. They should give me, a New York City topic. This doesn't make any sense. And I ended up writing the paper and falling in love with, agriculture. And, I view agriculture as the backbone of this country and the origin of where we are in today's society and with our success today. And so when I came to GW, I thought maybe I want to do something with policy regarding agriculture. So I worked in Congress for a semester for Congressman Josh Gottheimer in New Jersey's 5th District. And I loved the experience and I loved working with constituents, but I found policy is a little bit slow and I wanted to be in something more mathematical and quantitative. So I took my next internship at Sierra Angels. It's an angel investing firm based out of Lake Tahoe. And there we did really early stage investing, pre-seed. And so I was interested in the investing side of it, but, it was very early stage. There wasn't a lot of quantitative analysis that went into the investments because oftentimes they were medical companies that didn't even have a product yet. And so I moved within that group to Startup Nevada, which is Nevada's statewide incubator. And I worked a lot on battery investments. And I kind of went back to that whole commodity world and realized you know what, I love investing and I love this space. And so that summer I worked at the Edison Electric Institute doing energy supply finance. And it really solidified for me that I want to be in a space that has to do with energy. And so I ended up receiving an offer to do energy investment banking in Houston, but ended up renegotiating to go to JP Morgan to do corporate commodity derivatives, which is just a higher way of saying that we work with both producers and consumers to maintain and manage some of the volatility that comes in commodity markets. And so we do that through derivative strategies. And I'm happy to talk about any of this in detail, but here at GW, I am the co-lead of Finance 360. I'm the president of Women in Finance. I'm a senior mentor in WSFA, and I'm one of the mentors in the BLD program. And so I think that I just hope that my path resonates with some of the listeners. And, like I told you earlier, Sophia, I'm an open book, so I'm happy to talk about any of that in more detail.
Yeah, it's just your experience wide, different finance fields, venture capital, energy markets, and their financial impact, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get your take on the recent moves from OpenAI.
Yeah. Okay. So brought my notes for this. So I think that NVIDIA and OpenAI had a lot of market traction and people were really excited to see what it is they could do. And for starters, I think that NVIDIA in particular was an interesting component of the market because for so long, so many people relied on NVIDIA's chips and there was nowhere else to get them essentially. So they kind of cornered that market. And I remember I read an article a couple weeks ago that was talking about how Microsoft supposedly was NVIDIA's largest consumer and they were consuming up to 20% of NVIDIA's sales or something wild like that. And so it's interesting because, if a company has that level of a monopoly over the market, it makes trends within that company very difficult because if they have supply issues, then it affects everyone who consumes from NVIDIA. So that's very difficult. But in recent news, I wrote this down because I thought this was interesting. There was a podcast with two venture capital guys that I really enjoy. Their names are Brad Gerstner and Bill Gurley. And they interviewed Microsoft's CEO the other day, and he said, and I'm going to read this quote because I think it's really interesting. I am power constrained, yes. I'm not chip supply constrained. We were definitely constrained in 24. What we have told the street is that's why we are optimistic about the first half of 25, which is the rest of our fiscal year. And then after that, I think we'll be in better shape going to 26, and so we have a good line of sight. So this kind of like sent a shockwave through the market because not only is Microsoft NVIDIA's biggest customer, but like for the longest time, we have thought in our minds NVIDIA has the chip market, we're relying on them. And so even though like we've been bullish on AI, I think that the statement that he gave out kind of sent a shock to NVIDIA, and that's why NVIDIA has been somewhat weak, I feel like, in the recent weeks, because people always thought, Microsoft's consistent, so NVIDIA should be consistent. But I think in my more level of what I do and what I see, I think is really key about this statement is what he's saying about natural gas and the energy that's required to keep AI running. And so, and feel free to stop me whenever, but I think that something that everybody knows is how much energy goes into running AI and how much the data centers rely on energy.
Yeah.
And so the question begs is like, are we ready in society to make that run by renewable energy? Personally, no. So what's the next best thing? Probably natural gas. And so I think that the interesting thing about natural gas is natural gas has been up and down in recent years. We often liquefy natural gas and send it over to Europe because they don't have as strong as a natural gas pipeline. But in terms of like thinking about what people might want to invest in, I thought I should pull a little bit on that.
Yeah, because our listeners, our audience is like super interested.
Okay,
yeah.
Awesome. So I think that the US has to ask a couple of big questions. The first is, are they going to invest a lot of money into renewable energy now and understand how that can grow data centers? Or are we just going to go gung-ho onto natural gas? And so far it seems like even though renewables will no doubt have a role in this conversation, it's going to be focused on natural gas in the short term. And so I think a stock to watch personally, and take this with a grain of salt, is EQT Corporation, which is like kind of the quintessential natural gas stock. And they have been working quietly because, natural gas is not necessarily the industry that people read up on the most about if you're outside of commodities. But they have been working quietly in different shale formations in the Appalachian Basin, which is home to the largest low-cost reserves of natural gas in the U.S. And so what will be interesting is if companies are focused less on sourcing these chips and more focused on sourcing the energy, we should be putting time and energy into watching the energy companies and less the chip companies. This is from a commodities person, though, but I think it's interesting because it's like Microsoft itself is saying, we're less worried about getting the chips, we need the energy. And so I think energy is sometimes an underrated sector, and it's a great opportunity for people who have interest in commodities and specifically in the energy markets to kind of begin to gain access to them and grasp what's going on. And I think at a high level, even though energy tends to be very technical, energy is a very interesting industry that looks to have young people join. And so I highly recommend people continue to follow with the natural gas markets, especially as, these major tech companies are more looking to have energy conversations than chip conversations.
Yeah. So like we should focus our energies into something that's underlooked, you're
saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think the interesting thing about energy is energy is a sector that is going through a massive change right now. We're looking into renewables, we're looking into nuclear, we're looking into ways to do things that we haven't done before. And so I think especially for young people, it's a great time to get into the sector because it's ever changing. And so whether you want to be on the technical side of like drilling and refining, or you're interested in more long-term corporate strategy, this is a field that's looking for great young thinkers who are intelligent, who want to answer these challenging questions. Because the interesting thing about the energy sector, I feel like in particular, is we ask a lot of moral questions as much as intellectual conversations. Like when you think about how much energy is consumed and the impact it has on the environment, you might want to start adding some renewables into the space. But what does that mean for jobs in the energy sector of people who have jobs in refineries who can't easily transition into a renewables role? what does that mean for families and ecosystems that rely so heavy on traditional energy? And so I think that these are interesting conversations that are meant to be had over, multiple podcast episodes. But I think what's particularly interesting about NVIDIA and OpenAI is NVIDIA has been the sole proprietor of chips for up until this point. And so if there's chips that are being sourced elsewhere, but the energy cannot be sourced elsewhere, it kind of shifts the monopoly into the energy sector. And which energy companies are going to raise their hand and be like, yeah, we're going to power the data centers, and which are going to take a step back.
Yeah, because the power centers, they power GPUs that help different creations of from the rawest materials to big data centers. So it's this is actually going to have a ripple effect on different industries, right?
Yeah, for sure. And are we removing jobs from American households? Are we taking jobs from international households and moving them back to America? What is the definition of energy? How do we see energy fitting into the new administration? I think Trump traditionally has been less forward about what he thinks about renewable energy. That's not a concern for him as much as it has been in the past administration. And so the question is, are these energy companies just going to focus solely on natural gas because they don't think that the Trump administration is prioritizing renewables? And what does that mean for a short-term versus a long-term outlook? In the short term, yes, probably natural gas can power these facilities, but 5-10 years down the line, when the environment is in a sticky situation, when jobs are in a sticky situation, what does that mean for how renewable is going to get introduced? Are we going to one day wake up and decide that we're all going to switch to renewable? I would guess not. So the slow integration of renewable has to be sped up a little bit. But unfortunately, until it becomes a priority from the administration, I don't think that we are going to see that.
Yeah, and it's nice for us to know this type of information because we're taking a look at things that a lot of the media doesn't even pay attention to, and it's important for us to know it since we're talking about commodities and different shifts and talking about market shift. There's tons of questions over the 25% tariff on the steel and aluminum. How do you think this is going to have a ripple effect in the commodities market, or especially for the consumers?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a great question, Sophia. I think that tariffs have been the top of every news outlet. If you read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times every morning, you're going to see Trump announces new tariff, or Trump's administration is thinking about sanctioning this country. And so I think that one of the markets that's most impacted by that is frankly commodities, because we import a lot of commodities and we export a lot of commodities. And so tariffs directly have an impact on those markets. I think what Trump was initially trying to do is that there definitely has been an influx of subsidized Chinese metal that has flooded global markets. And this, in the short term, definitely put U.S. producers out of business because they couldn't compete with China's really low prices. And so there's pros and cons to this, right? Because the tariff will likely raise costs for industries that rely so heavily on aluminum and steel. And that brings higher prices for consumers and job losses in the downturn market, because ultimately in downstream, they're not going to be able to employ as many people if they have to pay this influx in a tariff cost. However, I think that people associate this industry with the more upstream side of it. So the people who are actually refining and, doing the digging and processing for these commodities. And so what I think we need to clarify first is that America buys almost half of their aluminum from abroad. So we rely very heavily on imports for aluminum products. So this begs the question for companies in the U.S. who rely heavily on aluminum. So think soda companies, anybody who uses aluminum in packages, they're going to be hit with this massive influx in an input costs. So I think specifically in those regions, but also in aerospace and defense manufacturing, they consume a ton of aluminum. So a 25% tariff makes that very challenging. But the U.S. relies less on imported steel. So domestic steel mills churn about 3/4 of what America uses. So if we buy about 3/4 of the steel within the U.S., the tariff has less of a direct impact. And so in the short term, I think what you can expect is the tariff would likely boost steel prices, which benefits U.S. producers and potentially adds, people are saying, about 140 jobs into the economy. So I think we should pause there for a second, because 140 jobs is not a lot. Like, 140 jobs, in my opinion, is not a life-changing amount, especially in an industry that can be very volatile naturally. Yep. And so it boosts steel prices also, which is something that people have to think about. Because in past, when Trump first imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum in 2018, prices for both metals rose some percent and imports fell by about a quarter. So, it's not a drastic impact, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. But I think the biggest and most important takeaway that I want listeners to have is this quote, which is, any job gains will likely be offset by losses in manufacturing and other industries that rely on steel. So this is interesting, right? Because the whole point that Trump, the hill that he loves to die on, is that we're bringing jobs back to the U.S. But what this is saying is that we're losing them immediately in the downstream market. So it's a net loss. And I think the hard part for Americans who, I would consider Trump our most recent populist president, probably since Andrew Jackson or Ronald Reagan, frankly. And so people who have been in an economically downturned position, who are struggling to put food on the table, see these headlines that Trump's bringing jobs back to the U.S. and maybe don't have the highest levels of financial literacy, so they just automatically jump on this boat of input the tariffs, put them on because I need a job. And I don't blame them for that. If you don't know anything about the way that tariffs work and all you see is that you're going to have a job, you're going to believe that. That's frankly, that doesn't not track.
Yeah, because as you were saying, even on the aluminum side, you were talking about soda companies.
Yeah.
We buy soda every time we get a meal or something. And if we're talking about a 25% increase, these big companies, whether it be Coca-Cola or Pepsi, they're going to change their prices, and it's going to affect every American.
And you brought up such a great point just now. It's the ripple effect it has on the rest of the economy. So when Trump first put on his tariffs in 2018, it led to the direct loss of 75,000 manufacturing jobs within the U.S. So this is expanding outside of aluminum and steel, because one, countries often put in retaliatory tariffs against other products that we directly consume a lot of. And now we're kind of in a terrible position, because not only are we dealing with these issues in steel and aluminum, now we got to look at cocoa, we got to look at other products we import and deal with the job loss in those sectors. And so now we're in this kind of downward spiral effect of the fact that we are tariffing this person who's tariffing us back, who's then we're going to tariff them again. And it's a never-ending spiral of job loss and economic uncertainty. And so something that I think about, that what I always loved about commodities personally, and you touched on this, is we directly interact with them every day. You go buy a Coca-Cola can, you buy a chocolate bar from Hershey's, you buy apples, you buy carrots, whatever it is. And you may not care what Trump's saying. You may not care about the economy. You may not invest in markets. But you're going to care if you go to McDonald's and your cheeseburger's $25, right? That's not supposed to be that way. You're supposed to go to McDonald's and get a $5 cheeseburger. And so I think that level of trickling down is when people are still going to be active in the markets and are going to demand an explanation. Think about the egg crisis going on right now.
When
are we going to talk about, not us, but when is the administration going to address that everyday Americans cannot afford eggs? I went to Whole Foods the other day. Yeah, a carton of eggs was $10.
Yeah, and they were there's a shortage on eggs. Yeah, please forgive us. I was like,
that's insane, though. And, frankly, most kids at GW probably can offset that crisis a little bit. But I guarantee you millions of Americans are not going to be able to put eggs on their table for the next 6 weeks. That's frightening. A lot of people rely on eggs to feed their children. And we're not getting any information, and we're not able to import. And the conversation of tariff is looming. This is when you see this, people getting involved with markets who have never been involved before. And I remember I read an interesting story once where it's you should be concerned about the markets or stocks if your taxi driver is telling you what to buy. And that quote is probably outdated and somewhat offensive, but I think the important part of it is that when everyday people are very concerned about what's going on in the markets, that's when you should probably step up and pay attention. And commodities in particular, because there is a normal sense of volatility and ebbs and flows in the commodity markets. They are meant to be volatile. But when an average American cannot put an egg on their children's table for 6 to 8 weeks and there's little to no explanation from the administration, that's when we need to like kind of lock in and be a little bit more concerned about what's going on. And that's kind of where my role doing corporate derivatives comes in, is we work with a lot of these major Fortune 500 companies to address this with derivative strategies and hedge some of that volatility risk. Is it enough? I don't know if it'll be enough. Like, you can't predict these massive tariffs and anything that's going on. And like, for example, I had a list of things that like are directly going to be affected by this. Like, aluminum makes up 80% of an airframe's weight, along with steel. A quarter of Coca-Cola's packaging is impacted by aluminum and steel. Like, so already, if you can't fly at the price you can fly at today and drink Coca-Cola, like, those are two things that are directly impacting the consumer. Building a car takes about a half ton of steel. So what if like the car prices shoot through the roof? And so what I think about when I think about commodities is it's the everyday person's direct relationship to the markets. So like, everyday people consume commodities. Doesn't matter if you're uber wealthy or you're, you know, in poverty, like, you're going to directly impact with commodities. So if you start seeing prices shoot up, it leads to conversations about, you know, what can the administration do to help these people out?
Yeah, because it has a ripple effect.
Yeah.
It's not only, you know, commodities trading and talking about it in general, because it actually affects our pockets.
For sure.
Daily lives. And yeah. But thank you so much for sharing your insights. And thank you for giving us different resources to look at. Because sometimes we don't think of it in a deeper way, but you with your understandings on it actually makes a big impact.
Thank you. I appreciate
But before we wrap up,
yes,
I wanted for you to tell us more about GWFSA.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I'm part of an organization here on campus called GWWSFA, which is the Wall Street Finance Alliance. Some of you might know it formally as REFA. And it's essentially the premier organization on campus to get students who are beginning as a freshman into their sophomore years onto Wall Street. And so we have a couple of tracks as part of the program. We have investment banking, which I originally came in as and moved on later to sales and trading, asset management, and wealth management. And so what happens is, starting your freshman spring, you begin the coffee chat period where you go to info sessions, you talk to every member in the club, and then followed by a super day in the fall of your sophomore year. And so the great part about WSFA is it connects you with a large array of alumni into the industry who can leverage their skills and what they've learned from being on Wall Street to help GW students get onto the street. And so I think for a while, there's been a mindset that GW is not a quote-unquote target school. And target schools are schools that are directly recruited at by these Wall Street banks. But we put and dedicate a ton of time and resources into our WSFA students to ensure that they are the cream of the crop. And so that when their resume gets pulled, they are ready to super day. They are technically advanced. They know their markets. And that comes with entrance into the WSFA program. It's definitely very competitive and it is time intensive. But if you're a student who's listening to this and you know, I want a career on Wall Street, this is the organization for you.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, and is it only for freshmen or sophomores or?
Yeah, so right now we're beginning our coffee chat period. We actually have an info session today, tomorrow, and I believe there's one next week. So this is for spring semester freshmen who are interested in a career on Wall Street. What happens after you go to the info session is you begin the coffee chat period from now till the end of this semester, and then your super day would be in September of your sophomore year.
Okay, that is so nice for our freshmen because they have to get on it. It's actually really interesting what you guys do because it's a program that a lot of other schools don't even offer. So
yeah, and you know what? Like I know it's really early. We talked about this offline before, and I'm sure freshmen are out there like, how do I know if I want to do sales or trading? And I don't think you necessarily have to be that specific. What I think that you should know is I want to be on Wall Street. I wake up every day and I love the markets. I love the drive. I love the passion. And that type of spirit is what we're looking for in WSFA. You don't need to necessarily have an intensive knowledge of the markets or of financial transactions, but you need to have the ability to wake up every day and be like, I'm going to grind for this. Like, I want this bad. And I think that's the commonality between all of us is we all want it bad. Yeah. But the last thing I'd like to say before, we kind of move away from this topic is like, if you're hearing this and you're a sophomore, you're a junior, and you missed the boat, quote unquote, for WSFA, I would tell you that the goal of GW's business program, and specifically people like myself, is that we want to get kids on Wall Street. Like, it doesn't matter if they're in WSFA or, whatever happens. Like, I want to mentor everybody to help them get their dream job. And so I think focusing on the fact, oh, I missed the boat because I didn't do WSFA as a freshman, it kind of contradicts the point of this. The goal is that we need to keep moving forward. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Meet the Robinsons, but it's like this orphan who goes into the future and he meets his future self and he's like a successful inventor and he's like amazing. But like right now he's like an orphan and his life kind of sucks. He gets like bullied, he gets hit or whatever. But the point of the matter is that his future self tells him, like, you need to keep moving forward. And that's what I live by, like, that principle of keep moving forward. Like, who cares if you missed the boat for this freshman or sophomore year? Like, now it's time to grind. Now it's time to interview prep. Ask me for help. Talk to Josh, your president. He's fantastic. Talk to other members of Finance 360. Get our insight. We're all here to help you. We're all here to help you all get the job that's meant for you. And so, WSFA or not, we want to be a resource to all of you. But if you are interested in WSFA, please feel free to email me and Josh and anybody else, and we'd be happy to begin the coffee chat period for all of you.
Okay, thank you, Jenna. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
And for our audience, thank you for watching this episode. If you like this type of content, please leave a comment, drop a like, and subscribe to our channel.
Yes, subscribe.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Midnight Markets podcast by the GWU Stock and Portfolio Management Club features student discussions on finance and market trends. This content is informational only, not professional advice.